Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special International Women's Day edition of Talk Data to Me. My name is Christina Balaam, and I'll be moderating today's panel. And I'm joined by three fantastic panelists, Alina, Dobrina, and Doris, who I will let introduce themselves to you now.
Hi, so I'm Alina Mambo, and I'm a security intelligence researcher here at Lookout.
Hi, my name is Dobrina, and I'm software engineering manager with Ivanti, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Doris Yang. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management at VMware.
Great. Thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone who is tuning in. So today we're going to be discussing the campaign that's part of this year's International Women's Day. And in this campaign name is Embrace Equity. And so we're going to be discussing equality and equity in cybersecurity. And the goal of this campaign as a whole is to open discussions about why equal opportunities aren't quite enough, that true inclusion and belonging require equitable action. And also to discuss how we can all challenge gender stereotypes, call out discrimination, draw attention to bias, and seek out inclusion. So with that in mind, let's kick off our first question. And that is, for our panelists, what does embrace equity mean to you?
So I can start with that. So to me, embracing equity means, like you said, like acknowledging that we all come from different backgrounds and we all start from like different places. And that doesn't always mean talking about like disadvantages. It just means like we have different knowledge and we have different experience. And it's about encouraging people, regardless of that, and supporting them on their learning journeys, their career paths, and their pursuits. I think a lot of times in tech, sometimes we get focused on people having certain shared experiences or even like certain shared lifestyles. Um, and like what happens when we do that is we actually lose out on knowledge. We lose out on people who would have made an impact. We lose out on ideas and new perspectives when we cage people in a box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me, when I hear the term embracing equity, to me it means doing so everywhere all the time and not just in the workplace. I think with a lot of the recent efforts, a lot of the focus has been, hey, how do we decrease the gender pay gap, or how do we provide equal opportunities, like you said, Christina? But I think a lot of it to me means doing this outside of the workplace, because inequity in the workplace is really symptomatic of a systemic inequality. So meaning we need to look at ensuring equality from the start. And um, to me, that's not just taking a step back and thinking about colleges and STEM programs, but really, looking at how we communicate to young children and being cognizant of gender stereotypes that we might be unconsciously communicating. And I think, continuing to introduce STEM to young girls at any age is great, and we should absolutely continue that. But how do we expose both young boys and girls to female STEM leaders so that we normalize that and introduce role models of all races and genders to help little girls identify and see themselves in that future? So I think that is really important, and really making sure that we do that in all parts of our lives and not just in the workplace.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And I feel like that would have such a dramatic impact on the ways that everyone approaches, people of differing backgrounds and different ethnicities in every single area, not just within tech. I think that's a really important point. So moving on to kind of a next question that is something that I feel like we discuss fairly often in the discussion about women in cybersecurity and tech in general, is pay discrepancy. So there was an interesting study from ISC Squared that showed that there's about an 8% discrepancy between millennial men and women earning between $50,000 and $100,000 per year. Meanwhile, the baby boomer generation is showing a discrepancy as high as 20%. So it seems like globally younger women face less severe pay discrepancy than older women. So for our panelists, what do you think organizations can do to address that gender pay gap?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's great that we're seeing younger generations with a smaller gap, but the fact that it still exists means that there's still work to be done. I think again, thinking about recent movements, I think we have done a better job about addressing inequality at the time of job offers, and hopefully, the more that we talk about it, we are also empowering um, the younger generation to come in and be better about negotiating and standing up for asking for what they are worth. But I think the work that needs to be continued, and we need to be better at, is continuing this behavior outside of just job offers, right? So, again, equity isn't a single point in time, but it needs to be something that we need to do continuously. And so I think we need to think about promotions and equity compensation cycles. And that way, it's not just about those who are entering the workforce, but those that are continuing to be there. And so for the people that are already there, maybe they might have started with an equitable start, but are we really, as a company, as a society, are we valuing the same things that may promote men versus women, right? Looking at some of the behaviors that might be sort of gendered today. How do we make that more equitable and ensure that the pay gap continues through the life cycle of someone's career and not just at the starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something we heard a fair bit about in the context of women in sort of all industries during this sort of lockdown period with COVID, how much their work was disproportionately affected by childcare too. And that kind of takes us to this next discussion around how really our working environment has changed so much over the last few years. And there's this new normal about being able to work from anywhere. And we've seen that impact a number of areas. For those of us in cybersecurity, the number of threats have increased significantly. It's impacted how people kind of try and balance work and life. But for you all, how do you think this increase in remote work has affected stereotypes and culture for women in the workplace?
The stereotyping has really increased. Even if you Google what a stereotyping is, by Google's definition, they will tell you what it is, and then they will give you an example as a stereotype of a woman as a carer. And with working from home, really women are more and more were viewed as people that take care of the home. And even in the early days of the pandemic, would be in a meeting, and more often when women were talking, in the background would be hearing kids talking and having fun. And more often, men would be in the quiet locations. It would be in a dedicated workspace. But now, when the kids started going back to school, this is no longer the case, and the women can really be productive when they work from home. When the offices started going back to other companies started going back to the office, we had discussions in if we should go back to the office and how often we should do that. And men were more likely feeling that, yes, we have to be in the office because we work better if we are there. And in my experience, that's not the case, because there's not need to spend time in traffic, and both men can be more productive if they work from home and they have the quiet environment and have more time for the things they like, to spend time with their families, and even to spend more time at work doing their work. So now what I'm noticing is that women are more embracing hybrid environment of work. Yes, it's good to work from home because you have all the conveniences. You don't spend time in traffic and you have the quiet environment of your house. But also it's good to have social interactions and occasionally go to work once or twice a week to catch up with your friends at work, to check on to get some ideas about vacation plans or something else to do on a weekend. So hybrid work is what I'm noticing is it's a good way to have more quality time.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of discussion around that too, and a lot of polls are showing that people tend to gravitate toward either fully remote or the hybrid model. People seem to really have a preference for that as well. And I think that makes sense, exactly what you were saying, Debrina. So kind of looking back in time a little bit, I feel like when we have these discussions about our industry, it's really hard not to reflect on what sort of like the quote unquote olden days of computing looked like. And back in the 50s and 60s, programming roles were incredibly dominated by women. And it was to the point that one technology company used to refer to working hours as girl hours rather than, what we hear sometimes now is more like man hours. And at that time, about 90% of programmers and systems analysts were women. So that is really quite the inverse of what we experience now. And according to another study from ISC Squared, in 2022, women only held about 24% of all cybersecurity jobs. So for you all, why do you think there's this lack of women in cybersecurity, and why do you think we need more women in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I was thinking about my own journey into cybersecurity because I'm fairly new to the industry, and I think two of the main problems I faced was like a lack of information, and then like a perception problem. So I think about when I was in university, and cyber to me was just like a big label, like a black box. Like it wasn't very clear. Like it was just one whole job. Like it wasn't very clear the kind of different roles and the different skill sets you could apply and have. And so I think about when I was like, yeah, coming into the industry and there was all of a sudden I had all this new information that was all just concentrated here. So I think we have a problem with exporting this information outside, and the different roles and the different areas that you could work in. And I think that extends to that, like ties in with the perception problem. It's hard to pursue a career where you don't have a clear role model, and not just like large role models. I mean, like, like a sister, an aunt, like a friend of a friend, someone whose career journey you can follow and you can apply to your own. And you can see, like, okay, they did this. Maybe I want to go and do this, or maybe eventually I'll end up here. It's like really hard to do that when you have nothing to base that on. And it's intimidating to do that too. And there's a lack of knowledge too to how to bridge that gap. And then to the second part of the question, yes, I think we definitely need more women in cyber. I think it's a perfect fit. I think about some of my friends who aren't like they're not in tech roles at all, and I like since joining, I'm so annoying now. Like I'm like, oh, this is a skill. I'm like, this is a cyber skill. This is a cyber skill. Like you should think about that. I think there's a lot of skills that women have that, again, going back to that lack of information, don't realize can be applied in like the cyber industry. Like I think about OSINT, and I think about all my friends and the way they gather information, and I'm like, this is such a big skill. Or like even like threat analysis and stuff like that, like just things that we kind of have to do daily, unfortunately. And I'm like, all this stuff can be really translated um, into the security industry, and it's knowledge that we do have. It just sometimes gets pushed aside in favor of like traditional skill sets, or traditional like an idea of what someone in cyber looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, especially around sharing that there are so many different areas that you can investigate within this industry. That's something that when I've talked to, especially like young women in high school who are interested in cybersecurity, but kind of think like it's all pigeonholed into like you have to just be looking at vulnerability research and be like super into like the low level, code. And then you talk about things like, yeah, OSINT work and some of the other research that you can do, and everyone's like, oh, I already kind of do some of this. And it's really cool seeing people recognize there are so many other avenues you can explore because this industry is so vast. And I don't think people necessarily understand that until they're in it. So yeah, such a good point. And so again, this kind of flows from the previous question, just talking about how we get more women in this industry and the fact that right now there really aren't quite enough. How for we're all sort of in more male dominated roles in an industry that is largely male dominated. When it comes to your experience in this industry, what challenges have you faced, and how have you dealt with them, if you don't mind sharing, or if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, in my experience, what I'm observing that there are actually more and more women in leadership positions than they used to be. This is becoming more acceptable that you'd go in communications with other partners or some other companies, and there would be women in the room. 10, 20 years ago, it was more male-dominated field than it is now. And yes, the number of women in sciences, in engineering in general is small, even from the colleges all the way to the industry. But I think recently the organization started realizing that there are certain qualities that women can bring and that are beneficial to the organization, especially in leadership positions. And in my experience, throughout my career, very often I would walk into a room that is male dominated, and we'd be discussing some problems, and I would suggest some idea and that would be ignored. And then some time later, somebody else would offer the exactly same thing, and certainly that becomes a great idea. So what I've learned is not to be bothered by that. Because the important thing is to be assertive, to state your ideas, to stand to your ground. And at the end of the day, the important thing is to do the right thing, to do what's best. So my advice is just not to be bothered if you are ignored or not heard enough. Just be assertive and stand your ground.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think that is a fairly common challenge that many women face, regardless of whether or not you're in leadership positions, right? I think the idea, there's sort of this unconscious behavior where women are supposed to be silent or might not have the best ideas. And so even if you do speak up, like Dobrina said, people may not hear you, may not hear the words that you're saying. And whether it's mansplaining or other examples of this behavior, oftentimes what you say doesn't get valued for the words and the thought, but rather, oh, a woman said it, might not be a good idea. I would actually challenge and say we should be bothered by that, and we should be pointing examples of that out and ensuring that we don't continue that behavior. I think for the most part, people generally don't intend to ignore what women say, right? But it's this unconscious inequity that's been ingrained in them. But usually when you point this out and people can identify, oh, you're right, you did say that. Or, if there's an email thread and say, look, I said the exact same thing, or I said something very similar, it was dismissed, it was jumped over in the email thread and someone later said the same thing. I think when you point that out, people are generally pretty receptive about recognizing what happened and trying to do better. And I think when we talk about equity, we really need to be looking at creating allies as well within the males in the workforce, right? Because together is how we kind of can combat inequity. So I would say I agree with Dobrina. We should not let that stop us from expressing our opinions and our ideas. But we should be bothered by it and use that as an opportunity to help our colleagues improve and really just axe out that behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the maybe easiest ways to be an ally is when you see that, if there's somebody who's not comfortable voicing it and saying, actually, I said that, being able to point it out and be like, oh yeah, that was the point that so-and-so made. Because sometimes that takes the onus off the person to, if they're not really comfortable voicing their opinion. It's an easy way to stick up for your colleagues. Yeah, that's a really great point. So, for any of the, say, people coming just out of school who are interested in cybersecurity, who maybe don't know a whole lot about this industry, but are wanting to learn more, and especially about anyone who identifies as a woman who's interested in cybersecurity, do you have a piece of wisdom or advice that you would give to them about your experience?
So there are great leaders that would help young women take career in engineering, and it's always seek help. There are mentors out there that may help how to navigate the industry world. Don't be intimidated. That would be the main point. even if there will be cases when you'll be in situations where you might be ignored or your voice not heard. Don't be intimidated by that, and point it out like Doris noticed, and make it heard. So you just follow your dreams. If this is something that you like, definitely go ahead and follow career in software engineering, in engineering in general.
Yeah, to add to that, I would say, yeah, stay curious. Harness like a passion around learning. If something interests you, keep pursuing that until you figure it out. I mean, I feel like if I were to think about what has led me to this place, it's just like that drive for knowledge and to understand. Like to add on to what Debrina said, yeah, find a mentor. If you can find someone who is willing to answer your questions, grab onto them. I think people are also a lot more willing than sometimes we realize to answer questions, to guide you, to like have discussions about things. I think also like attending events, attending conferences, and then not being discouraged too, because I feel like sometimes those events can be intimidating. But attending, networking, asking questions, those are all skills that can be learned and expanded upon. And maybe the first time you go and you ask one question, you talk to one person, and then you build on that slowly. Especially for girls who are starting out in high school or university, it's a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that point about mentorship. I think, I know when I was first getting into cybersecurity specifically, I felt really intimidated, like cold calling or like cold tweeting people asking for advice. But I think, like you said, Alina, you'd be surprised how willing people are to help you and to share their experience. I think especially because so many of us have had the same experience and been in the same position. So really good advice. And speaking of conferences, for anybody who is watching and is interested, the 2023 Day of Security Conference is coming up in a few months. It is free to attend, and this year it's going to be held virtually and in person. So if you want to learn more, there's a link on this post that will take you to details about the event. And that's all the time we have for our panel. Thank you all so much for being here today, to our incredible panelists, for your time and your insight. And thank you to everyone who has taken the time to be with us and watch. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.